All right. So we are now getting started with the next session. The first speaker that will come up will be the first of 5 in different sessions that we have today called India Stories. Now, most of this event, of course, as you know, is focused on climate, but we have some extremely inspiring speakers who are doing work in different areas, and we wanted to make sure that because it's the Give India Philanthropy Summit and there are other things that we also want to shine a spotlight on, that they get a chance to say what they're working on and share it with all of us. The first speaker today in the India Stories session is VR Ferose, who is the founder and the chairman of India Inclusivity Foundation. First, we will play a video, and then Ferose will come up. You know, I'm often asked at Indiaspora that, you work in several different countries with your team and, so many events, and it's such a busy schedule. And, do you like your job? And I tell them very candidly that one of the greatest things that I feel lucky and privileged about in my job is to come across people in different fields who are doing amazing work, people like all of you. And one of the first names that I think of when someone asks me that question is none other than my friend VR Ferose, who will come up today and talk to us after the video is seen. All right?
Believe in the idea of emergence, that if you have the right people, the right spirit, the right energy, something incredible will emerge.
So the vision was to bring together 10 different artists on a 10 by 10 canvas to create a unified concept that really symbolized 10 years of excellence for the India Inclusion Summit. And so we have many different artists who are bringing their own ideas to the forefront. We asked them, what does inclusion mean to you? What is your passion? What do you want to share with the world?
People, what they see in gallery is a finished work of art. However, here we are able to experience the artists at work, and each one of them, their style, their approach to creating texture, creating details, and everything in between. So it is an experience that has to be experienced.
Vilas, you're going to have competition from this man.
Yeah, I know.
He's become faster painter than you. Huh?
For me, the fact that we are all in this room itself is a blessing. Now everything else is a bonus, right? The art piece itself is just an excuse for all of us to come together.
The artworks that you see over here, they're about our own life stories. It's not just a blend of colors, but we're trying to tell our stories.
When all of us are really in touch with our truest self and we can be honest with ourselves to say, this is what I love to do. This is my passion. I'm going to follow that. When we all follow our passions and can really create from the heart, that's when this world is at its best. We are all giving the gift that no other person can give. Only you can give that gift. And so I feel like we are sharing those gifts with the world today.
So I have 12 more minutes. Can you hear me behind? Am I audible? Is this clear? Okay. The light is on my, so I'll kind of stand here. So I have 12 minutes, and I'm going to tell, and I'm trying to share 12 years of my journey in 12 minutes. So I'll kind of speed it up. Everything that I'm going to tell is already written in this book called The Invisible Majority. The foreword is written by His Holiness the Dalai Lama. It was released by Vice President on 3rd December, 3 years ago. It was a #1 bestseller. But I know it takes a lot of time to read this, so I'll try to give a quick summary for all of you. But this is not a marketing pitch for the book. But I just thought it's important to share two elements in the next 12 minutes. The first is what we do, but probably the more important one is how we do it. Because everybody whom I heard here is doing incredible work. There's no doubt about it. I think everybody is passionate about their missions. I'll tell very quickly about the mission that me and my organization are working on, but I'll probably try to spend last 2 to 3 minutes on talking about how we do it, because that's probably the hardest part. And we are trying to do, in some ways, a very radical approach to doing social good. And so I'll try to share some of those ideas and tell me if it resonates with you. I don't claim to have mastered any of it, but I'll tell you some of those radical ideas. The first thing I want to say is that, I think we're all actors in a series of coincidences. A lot of things happen in life which are not planned, and my journey into the world of disability was completely unplanned. And it started 12 years ago. And I'll give you a quick background. I used to be the head of a small company called SAP back in India. You heard about SAP, most of you? It's a small company, a tiny company here. So I used to head SAP labs in Bangalore. I was running a 5,000 people organization. I had married my college sweetheart and had an incredibly good-looking son. His name is Vivan. All of you agree he's good-looking? Yeah. Is that unanimous? Everybody raise your hands. Oh, fantastic. Thank you. That's the only time I get 100% people raising their hands. So, and you start believing that you have probably got the most well-scripted life in the world. I was one of the younger CEOs of a global multinational in India, the first non-German MD of SAP, and I thought, this is perfect. Life can't get better. And then one day I went out for dinner with the CTO of the company, and he came back and said, Feroze, and my son Vivan at that time was 15 months old. He came back and said, Feroze, I think you should go to doctor and check for if Vivan has any issues. And I'm like, no, his development path is perfect. His weight is perfect. He looks great. Everything is good. Why are you saying this? And he said, Feroze, I see 2 or 3 issues. Number 1, he's not responding to his name. And number 2, he's not making eye contact. And number 3, he's watching the same thing over and over again. And he said, why don't you test him for autism? And I'm like, what is autism? I told my wife, this is what he said, we should check for autism. She was very angry about it. She said, no, he's perfectly fine. Why does somebody say anything is wrong with a child? Long story short, I went back home, did what most of us do. The first thing is check with Dr. Google. So I Googled what is autism. The second thing I did is what are the 10 characteristics of autism. And I went from 1 to 10, and I put a check box for everything for Vivan. And at that moment, my heart stopped. And I said, here goes my well-scripted life. The doctor called me into his office. Me and my wife were there. I remember the first thing he said, he's on the spectrum, but we don't know how severe it is. He's too young. Let's start him on therapy. Went back home, didn't speak to my wife, locked myself in the bathroom and cried for 30 minutes. And then, like everybody else, I went through the 5 stages of grief. The first is anger. Why does this happen to me? What have I done? Obviously, before that is denial. No, maybe the doctor is wrong. Maybe we'll check a few more doctors. But, after the denial stage comes anger, then the third stage is bargaining. You start thinking that maybe he's not as severe as he's probably less severe. And then you go through the 4th stage, which is depression. So I went through depression. And at that time, I was heading SAP. So, it's a hard day job, and then you are going through this personal crisis. But then a phone call changed my life. Dr. Kiran Bedi, many of you would know. She's a dear friend and a mentor to me. She has been mailing me for some time, but I didn't respond, which is unusual. I normally respond very quickly. She called me up directly and said, Feroze, beta kya hua? What happened? And I broke down and said, Vivan is diagnosed with autism. I don't know what to do. And she said something that changed my life forever. She said, Feroze, most people spend their entire lifetime not knowing what their purpose is. You are incredibly fortunate the purpose found you. At that moment, it was like a switch going off in my head. From seeing myself as a victim, I started thinking, what can I do to make just the situation not for my son better, but for the larger community? So that's my induction to the world of disability. I had no clue what it is, and I was head along into the world of disability. But of course, I had no clue what to do with it, right? So, okay, fine. If this is my purpose, what should I do? So I spent a lot of time trying to understand the space. And what I'm going to tell you is 3 insights that I received. And there are many more, but I have time only to share 3 fundamental insights and the action we have done to cater to those insights. The first insight was that I spoke to every parent I could about what is the #1 challenge that these parents face when they have a child with disability, autism or otherwise, doesn't matter. And all of them said one thing: we don't know what will happen to our children after we are gone. That's it. That's the only one thing that keeps a parent awake at night. What happens to a child after we are gone? And I looked at the data, and the data was surprising. Especially in the world of autism, we found that 99% of the kids born with autism are sitting at home and not have any form of meaningful employment or engagement. 99%. Most of them spend their life playing video games, nothing else. And parents are frustrated. I don't know what to do with them. And they said, if you can change that narrative, if you can give them meaningful employment, that's when is the first step towards being independent. And I looked at the data across the world, 99%. India is even higher, but the world was around 90 plus, India was 99. And we said, how do we change that? What happened was, I met an incredible social entrepreneur in Denmark. His name is Thorkel Sona, who's a Schwab fellow, and he was facing the same problem. His son was diagnosed with autism. He started a technology company called Specialist Turn, where he hired people on the autism spectrum and proved that they were as good or better than the best engineers. So he said, you can provide employment for especially people on the spectrum, but they have very unique skills. Tailor your job to the skills, and you will be able to find meaningful employment with them. I came back from Denmark after visiting what he has done. I went to the HR department. I said, we are going to hire people on the autism spectrum. The HR head said, Feroze, are you smoking? How does this even work? We don't even know what autism is. Most people on the spectrum haven't even gone to school or college. Forget about having a computer science degree. We changed all of that. We hired 3 people on the autism spectrum who had just done class 10 standard. They knew how to browse the internet. In 6 months, we trained them how to do some of the specific technology tasks. In 1.5 years, I was able to prove that these 3 autistic people were better than my best engineers. What happened after that was nothing short of a miracle. People ask me, what was the business plan? I said, there is no business plan for miracles to happen. I was selected as a young global leader by the World Economic Forum in 2012. I was invited to Davos to give a 5-minute pitch about an idea that can change the world. I gave a story about ability and disability. CNN carried that news. The CEOs, our CEOs at SAP were at Davos. They read the news, and they called me for a breakfast meeting. They said, Feroze, are you doing this? I said, yes, I've been doing it for 2 years. I didn't tell anybody. He said, does it really work? I said, if it can work in India, it can work everywhere in the world. Because India is the hardest place to make it work. There is no insurance, there is no healthcare, there is no awareness. If I can make it work in India, it can work everywhere in the world. I gave that speech in January at Davos. In May, our co-CEOs made a commitment to the world that we will hire 1% of our global workforce on the autism spectrum. We were 65,000 people. We said we will hire 650 people on the autism spectrum. It was the most landmark announcement ever made in the world in the field of disability by any large corporate. In 2016, it became a Harvard case study. In 2016, SAP was invited at United Nations by Secretary General Ban Ki-moon, and he asked every corporate to do what SAP did. In 2019, at SAP, we have something called the Founders Award for the best innovator or the greatest innovator in the company out of 100,000 people right now. For the first time, SAP made an exception and did not give an award to a team, but gave an award to an individual. And guess what? The individual was hired in Argentina, was on the autism spectrum. Today, we have hired 220 full-time employees across 10 countries, 20 different locations. But the more interesting thing is the following. 102 companies across the world have an Autism at Work program inspired by SAP. And it all started with one boy. If somebody says one person can't make a difference, send them to me. That was one of the Forbes articles that went viral. Even today, this is called How Autistics Triumphed at SAP Labs. You can do a Google search, you will find it. Even today, after 12 years after the article was published, I get mails and letters from mothers across the world saying, Feroze, thank you for giving hope. I don't know whether my child will ever work at SAP or any other companies, but you've given us hope. And that is the most important thing. This is the Harvard case study, which is called Autism at Work. So the first thing I want to say is the following. I said I'll give you 3 simple messages. The first thing is everybody is good at something. That's the tagline of my foundation. It is our inability to find what people are good at. Everybody is good at something. Let me share the second insight. I don't know how many of you have seen this photograph. If you see, this photograph broke my heart. This was in Indian Express. I write a regular column at Indian Express for the last probably 5-6 years. This was covered by Indian Express. This is on solar eclipse day every year in Kalaburgi district in Karnataka. Disabled children are buried neck down in the hope that they will become abled. When I was the MD, I was hosting Dr. Arun Shourie, I think one of the greatest scholars of the country. His son is profoundly disabled. He had written a book which is called Does He Know a Mother's Heart? His son is 50 years old, probably older right now. He wrote a book called Does He Know a Mother's Heart? And his simple insight was the following. The world average is 15%. 15% of the world's population is disabled. That's 1 billion people. And every disabled person affects at least 4 other people. I know my son is disabled. It affects me, my wife, my parents, and my in-laws. If you just calculate 15% and multiply it by 4, because it affects 4% directly, 60% of the population is affected by disability. But nobody speaks about it. In India, it is a topic of taboo. And he said, why doesn't people in India speak about disability? And he wanted to spend time to research this, and he found something incredibly insightful. He said, I want to look at the narrative of religions about suffering. And he said, what does Islam say about, why should I have a disabled child and some of you not? Why me? He said, let's check Islam, let's check Christianity, let's check Hinduism, let's look at Buddhism. And he looked at all these religions and he found that all of them have a flawed narrative, especially Hinduism, which says that it is because of karma. You've done some evil, so you have to suffer now. Once that is the narrative, people don't want to speak about it because they don't want to feel that I've done some sin. And here is the data that proves it. In the 2011 census, for the first 50 years in census in India's history, we didn't count people with disabilities. When we started it, that number was shockingly 2%. It's not possible. The world average is 15%. In fact, some say it's almost 20% now, if you include mental health issues. So if it's 15% in the world, why is it 2% in India? In 2011, when they did the last census, it was 2.2%. How ridiculous is that? So there's been a lot of campaign to start getting the real numbers. You know, every technologist in this room knows that only if you have the number will you actually know what the problem is. If you know what the problem is, you probably can solve it. So the big insight, and I hosted Dr. Shourie for his book launch at SAP. It's called Does He Know a Mother's Heart? The important thing is he. When he says does he needs God. He says, does God know a mother's heart? And when we did that, my room was full of mothers. And they said, thank you for telling this, because almost all the time in India, the blame is either on the child or the mother. And we need to change that narrative. So when I asked Dr. Shauri, sir, what can I do? I had no clue what to do. He said, Feroze, change the narrative of disability. If you do not change the narrative, if it is still seen as a taboo, you're not going to change anything in this country. Change that narrative. And he said, create a platform to celebrate people for who they are. In 2012, I started the first Inclusion Summit. And today it's the world's largest platform for people with disabilities. World's largest. And it's not just the best event, and I don't say that. You can ask Anshu, who comes every year. He says Feroze is the best event in the world, period. Because we said people with disabilities need to get the spotlight, and we need to celebrate them. This is not asking for sympathy. We need to celebrate them for who they are. Here is the most important element that all of us have to realize. Disability is the largest minority in the world. 15% is the largest minority in the world, period. And we all will become members of that very soon. Doesn't matter what your religion is, what your background is. My dad is 82 years old now. He has severe knee problem. He can't walk. He's getting there. If you live long enough, you will become part of this minority, okay? So there is a moral reason for all of you to take this damn thing seriously. I am a full-time caregiver, of course, a father first, a caregiver for my son who's profoundly challenged, 14 years old now, can't speak, has a severe form of Crohn's disease. I'm a full-time caregiver for my son, but I'm also a caregiver for my parents and my in-laws who are all around the age of 80 and plus. If all of you know this, you will all have elderly parents and they will have some form of disability. When I talk about 15% of the world's population being disabled, I am not using the elderly population into that. If you add to that, that's a larger number. The thing that we have to change the narrative is the following. We believe that there are two categories of people, disabled and abled, which is completely wrong. We have disabled and non-disabled, because we are all temporarily abled. Only for some time. So the idea was, when we started the foundation, we said, how do we make India truly inclusive by 2030? And so I've written the details in this book. This is a blueprint which has suggestions to the government, to the nonprofit, to corporates as to what is it that we can do to make India truly inclusive. My thinking is very simple, and I've explained it in great detail. The fundamental thing that needs to be done, of course, we need to do employment, we need to do education, we need to do all the way up to assisted living and so on. But the first thing that we need to do is change mindset. And that's the hardest thing to do, because these are deeply embedded over centuries of belief systems. That's the hardest part to do. If you don't change the mindset, nothing else would matter. And so what I've been trying to do in my foundation is change mindsets for 1.4 billion people. And we realized that the mindset change cannot happen in the traditional setup. So we said, let's do something that no other nonprofit is doing in the world. We've identified 5 radical principles to bring this change. Radical principles. Almost everybody says, Feroze, what you're doing is not feasible. I can tell you, we've done it for 12 years. I want all of you to leave with these 5 radical principles and try whether it works or not. And I've learned a lot from working in the corporate world. I've been with SAP for 25 years, so I know a little bit about the corporate world. So one of the things I said is I know what doesn't work in the corporate world. So we said we will upside down some of the principles. We'll reverse some of the principles that doesn't work in the corporate world and apply it into a nonprofit. So I'll give you those 5 principles. The first principle is centralize on purpose, decentralize on power. Corporates do the exact opposite. Corporates are centralized on power. It's hierarchical. Everybody wants a promotion, wants to go up, become the CEO. Not everybody can become the CEO. It's centralizing power, decentralizing purpose. We said we will do the exact opposite. What does that mean? We said we will scale the idea, not the organization. My entire organization has 0 employees, has 0 assets. It's 100% volunteer driven. It has 0 cost of operations. Because we said if you want to scale, the other models are not scalable. So let's try to do something completely radical. No employees, no payroll, no assets. Completely volunteer-driven. First principle. The second principle, which is the hardest one to follow, is no logos and no egos. Corporates support us, we don't mention them. Because we said, you have to lead with purpose, not with your power. So don't, companies have come and said, Ferose, I'll be the platinum sponsor. I said, there are no platinum sponsors. And even if you pay me $1 million, you will not be mentioned anywhere. 95% of the corporates don't give us fund at all. And I'm fine with that. We rely on the 5% who give. They give it for the right reasons. No logos and no egos. The third principle is we don't do fundraising, we do friend raising. We said we'll raise friends, and it takes a lot of time. They will give money. Don't worry, we'll not ask. We'll not do fundraising. Because as soon as you get into fundraising, you start gaming the system. And the most important thing is that whatever we start, we will do it for at least 10 years. So when people say that I want to support you, I said, can you do it for 10 years? If the answer is yes, join us. Otherwise, we won't do it. Because what we've realized is change, social change at scale takes time. Mindset change cannot happen over 2 years. So I do not start a project for 2 years at all. I said, mat karo yaar, time waste hai. 10 saal karoge? Join us on board. Anshu is one of my advisors, so you know why he's my advisor, because we do all crazy stuffs here. And the last but not the least, we said we will not produce reports. No impact report. Because I don't know what the impact is. How does it mindset, can you tell me how will you measure mindset change? If anybody can tell me mindset change can be measured, come and talk to me. I said, I'll not create reports. Because volunteers don't want to do reports. They want to actually work on the ground. Ask Anshu. The volunteers want to work on the ground. If I say, please write a report, they'll say, Ferose, don't waste my time. I have my day job. So I want to leave you with Paulo Coelho beautifully said it. Do good, but don't waste your time trying to prove it. Thank you very much.